will be conducted in English. For those who require translation, we provide simultaneous interpretation system by clicking the globe button on your bottom of your Zoom screen. It's about to start after 2 minutes.
Hello, good morning, Yasmin. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning.
Hello,
Bu Elga.
Father Iswara. Good morning.
And everyone.
This is from Poso, Banjarmasin, Papua.
Good morning, Bu Elga.
Hello.
Good morning semuanya.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning also from Poso.
Oh, yes. Pak Asher.
Good
Yeah,
morning.
thank you.
Good morning from Melbourne,
From
Australia.
Timur too here.
Good morning from North Sumatra.
And from Medan or Pematang Siantar, I saw.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good
And
morning,
of course-
Welga.
Yes,
Hello,
good morning,
good
Bu
morning.
Elga.
Good
Selamat
morning.
pagi, Kak Ah. Everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Sister Terena from
Sumatera, North.
where are you now? Pematang Siantar. I already Samosir, right?
Yes.
Oh my, close to Toba Lake.
It's near to me.
Oh,
Nice to meet you too.
Nice to meet you.
Ada Pak Aser.
Nggih.
Halo Pak Aser.
Hai.
Masih ingat kah?
Yes.
hi Minako. Good morning.
Good
Hi, Sue.
morning.
Oh, Father Johannes Prasetya is here already from Sanata Dharma University. Yeah.
All right, we begin.
Hey.
Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Shalom,
Waalaikumsalam.
Namo Buddhaya, Om Swastiastu. Welcome to Public Religion and Climate Change, in which learning about interfaith youth movement in facing climate change challenges. Global climate change has taken a serious concern all over the world, not only impact to the circles of human life, it's even threatened to the earth itself, because we know that all human beings and all the living things are interconnectedness. All association, institution, hand to hand together, move in social action confronting this issue, include Institute of Dian Interfaith together with the Faculty of Theology in Islamic State Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, Theology in Sanata Dharma, Duta Wacana Christian University, and all associated in this program. The 13th Interfaith School has brought us back to the entire problems of climate change in Indonesia. It's began from the North Sumatra, Samosir, Papua, Boti, and all over Indonesian places. Matakin Muhammadiyah Centers of Environmental Majelis, and we, knowing deepen about this problem, this threaten and analyze about the root problem and reflect to each of individual of our group in this attendees of this program. Let me send the best regard to the facilitators who made this program succeed. They are Dr. Pasianta, MSF from Sanata Dharma University, Dr. Wahyu Nugroho, MA from Duta Wacana Christian University, Mr. Otto Adi Yulianto, Nurhalis Majid, and Mrs. Elga Sarapung from Dian Interfaith. And also they are Mr. Leo Simanjuntak from Greenpeace, the representative of Environmental Assembly in the Center of Muhammadiyah, Mr. Nelian Gogali from Mosintowo Institute, Pastor Rain Justin Gultom from HKBP District in Samosir, and the monk Santa Sito from Dhammapinda Arama Monastery, and all the network who has associated with Dian Interfaith for this program that I can mention entirely. And also by all our honor to the attendees, the ASEAN Conference from Religious for Peace from India, Myanmar, Japan, Australia, Bangladesh, and etc. Okay, no further ado, let's begin our agenda by delivering the prayer from Mr. Kawidana from Gedong Gandhi Ashram Kandidesa, Bali. The time is yours.
Thank you. Om Ano Bhadraha Kratavo Yantu Viswataha Om Swasti Matra Utapitreno Astu Swasti Gopyo Jagate Purushebhyaha Vishwam Subhotam Svitratam No Astu Yogeva Drisema Suryam Om Swasti Prajabhya Paripalayantam Nyayena Margena Mahim Mahisaha Gobramanevya Subhamastu Nityam Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu Kale Varsatu Parjanyaha Prithvi Sasya Salini Desoyam Shubharaitaha Brahmana Shantu Nirvayaha. May all noble thoughts come to us from every direction. Welfare be to our mother and father. Welfare to the cows, to the world, and to all men. May everybody belonging to us be happy and endowed with auspicious knowledge. May we be seeing the sun for a long time. May people be happy. May the king righteously rule the earth. Let there be welfare for animals and men of wisdom or thinkers at all times. May all be happy. May it rain at a proper time. May the earth produce grains. May this country be free from famine. May men of contemplation or the thinkers, the brain trust of the country, be fearless. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May peace and peace, always peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kawidana, for the praise. And thank you for all the attendees for being able to be here in the middle of your hectic schedule. I'm Shafir Anissa from the master student in Islamic State University of Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta. I'm very honored to be MC here and very excited to be along with you all in these Zoom meeting calls. It's such a great opportunity for us to interact and discuss with peers and colleagues across the religion and climate change. Reminding us again, if you would like to ask the question, please raise your hand or simply drop your questions into the chat box. And again, who inquired the translation, please click the globe button on your bottom of your Zoom screen. It's provided into English, Indonesian in the bilingual. With our interpreter, Mr. Fatayillah Murshidi, Anggita Pramesti Bahi Sijayavin. And also thank you for all the participants of this 13 Interfaith School from Christian Duta Wacana Christian University, Islamic State, Sunan Kalijaga, Yogyakarta, and Sanata Dharma, and so on. Okay, no further ado, please let's now the welcoming speech from the member of the Board of Trustees of Institute Dian Interfidei, Professor Dr. Yusni Sabi, from the Sociology of Religion State Islamic University of Araniri, Banda Aceh. The time is yours.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. First of all, we have to thank the Creator for having created us as human beings and living in one humanity. And now we are trying to protect, to maintain our good life and improving to be a better life, especially, of course, related to climate, to the weather, to environment, as far as it is contributing to our better life and be prosperous in our daily life. We are here coming from different institutions in the beginning, and myself as a member of boards of Interfidei, Dian Interfidei, Yogyakarta, welcoming everybody who are taking parts in this public lecture being delivered by Prof. Azza Karam, Prof. Azza Karam from International Peace, and hopefully you are able to participate, to understand, to know more about our life, especially in relations among us from many faiths. That's why here in this Interfidei, we are having from different religions: Islam, Catholic, Protestants, Baha'i, and so on. And not only that, we are also coming from different sections of life, different institutions, government, NGOs, and so on. Dear participants all, first of all, I and we are thanking Prof. Azza Karam, who is now going to deliver a very important speech relating to our well-being in this very life, especially, of course, relating to the climate change. And that's why in these interfaith schools, Sekolah Lintas Iman, yang ke-13, the 13th series of this interfaith schools of interfaith education, we are trying to focus on religion and climate change. That is why we are conscious and we are putting emphasis on the problem of climate change, which is now going on very rapidly, day by day, and even hour by hour. Can you imagine? I'm now in the very extreme west of Indonesia, in Sabang, on Sabang, yeah, Sabang city or West Island, as if now we are sweating. Can you imagine? As if now midday, but no, in Sabang or near Banda Aceh, we are just 8 in the morning, but we are already sweating. Why? Can you imagine? Because of the weather, it's very hot. So then we are hoping that in this project, we're able to work together, to contribute together, simply how to maintain our good communication, our good faith in each other, in asking, in promoting, first of all, in promoting good deeds, and then of course asking the mercy of the Almighty God. And then we are thanking Prof. Azza, yeah, for having time to deliver her speech far away from, I believe, in New York or somewhere in United States. And that's why in this very rare opportunity, I'm hoping that each participant can take advantage of this very special delivery, very special speech that can enrich us in dealing with our community, with our environment, with our government, because every aspect of it is a challenge to the change of climate, in this country, especially in Indonesia and Southeast Asia and all over the globe. And last but not least, we are hoping that, of course, this event can be continued in the future in whatever form, especially in enriching us. First, of course, how we can be sincerely living together in good faith with each other without intervening any faith of person or groups, but we are living within our own faith, but can contribute to the betterness of human being altogether. And we thank everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much from Professor Dr. Yusni Sabi. So let's move on the next session. To embark the interesting about the religion and climate change, we all need to motivate it to adapt and to transform ourselves. For those purpose, Dian Interfaith Day invites us, a world-renowned speaker from the General Religious for Peace International, that will be moderated with the earlier alumni of Dian Interfaith Day. Let me give a brief introduction about her. She is a journalist at the Gecko Project, and she focused public policy, human rights, and security in Indonesia. She's also Chevening Scholarship recipient with a master's degree in culture and conflict in global Europe from the London School of Economic and Political Science. Please give a round virtual applause to welcome Miss Margaret S. Aritonang. The time is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Safira. That's a nice introduction. Good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi semua. Good morning, especially to Professor Azza. I'm very thrilled to be invited to this discussion or public lecture, because for the past 1 year, I have been doing a lot of environmental crimes with my team at the Gecko Project. So it's an honor to be here to learn together with all of you, to find solutions to we are facing together regarding the climate change issues. Today, we have Professor Azza Karam, the Secretary General Religions for Peace International, with us. Professor Azza also holds a professorship of religion and development at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. I'm not sure if I pronounced the thank you, Professor. She has also served in different positions in the United States since 2004. And her last post was a senior advisor on culture at the United Nations Populations Fund, or UNFPA. And she was born in Egypt, lived and worked in many countries, and is currently based in New York. Okay, Professor, you have 30 minutes to enlighten us with your thoughts and reflections, perhaps. And as I mentioned earlier, we provide like a longer time for our participants to come up with questions or comments later. So later on, we have 1 hour for that question and answer sessions. So the floor is yours, Professor.
Thank you very much indeed. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for this privilege and the honor and the joy, quite frankly, of being able to address you here today. I am very grateful to the Institute for Interfaith Dialogue in Indonesia, the Faculty of Theology at the Duta Wakana Christian University, Sanata Dharma University, and the Usuluddin Faculty at the State Islamic University in Yogyakarta. I am especially grateful to Dr. Elga Sarapung, who is very quickly becoming a very close sister in spirit and mind. Thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak with you a little bit today.
Thank you.
I think that the subject matter that you have chosen for this interfaith school is particularly timely and relevant. You all know better than many people around the world just how significant and how drastic and dramatic the impact of climate change is already. We cannot speak anymore in terms of what will happen. We are actually on a day-to-day basis living the impact of what is happening already. We are suffering the rising water levels. There are already submerged communities. We are also suffering the impact of lack of clean water and lack of sufficient water in many parts of the world. We are seeing simultaneously floods in some parts of the world, as well as fires in others. We know for a fact that the air, the oxygen that we are breathing is an endangered element of our life. We have reached a stage where land, water, and sky are all endangered. In other words, we have reached a moment where we have seriously and severely abused our environment. And yet the greatest irony, perhaps, and the saddest, is that this is the very environment that we absolutely need to survive. So we've reached a stage in our lives and in our environment where the very things we need and that we depend on are actually endangered in every way, shape, and form. I think what we also understand is why it has become necessary for us to change our behavior and our attitudes at a very basic level, and why it has to happen from an individual to a community, to a national, and to a global level. There is no question that we have to adapt to our environment rather than assuming that the environment will adapt to us. So the subject matter is quintessentially about survival. Now, where is the role of religions in all of this? We know for a fact that religions are the most critical influencers of our human behaviors and attitudes. We know that religious institutions and religious communities, and especially religious NGOs, are very critical and the longest standing service providers. What we call today social services are in fact development aspects. And we know for a fact that the largest, oldest, most widest reaching social service providers are religious in nature. They are not only Muslim or only Christian or only Jewish or only Hindu. In fact, most services around the world have traditionally and continue to be, to a large extent, provided through religious institutions. I am not sure how many of you are aware of the fact that even in the United States of America, which is supposed to be a developed country, 70% of basic healthcare through the hospitals, 70% is provided through the Catholic Church alone. I'm not sure how many of you are aware that 40% on average of basic healthcare across Africa is provided through religious institutions, Christian institutions. If we combine and look at these data and statistics, we will realize that basic primary healthcare around the world is actually a quarter, at least a quarter of basic primary healthcare is being provided through religious institutions. Now, we have not even begun to assess educational institutions, schools, universities. We have not even begun to document services like sanitation and nutrition. We know for a fact that religious actors and religious institutions are very critical providers of the very basic social services around the world. We also know a third aspect, which is that whether we like it or not, for good or for not so good, religion and politics today are very strong bedfellows. In other words, there is a very strong, enduring, and emerging more powerful relationship between religious and political actors today. And we're not just talking about Saudi Arabia and Iran, the usual suspects, but we're also talking about Hungary, about Poland, about the United States. We are talking about other countries. You know your own country best. We're talking about a context where religion and politics have become the new allies, the new old allies, because after all, religious empires are the oldest empires as we know them. In fact, the oldest political institutions are religious institutions. We are seeing today and living today the re-emergence of that very strong relationship between religion and politics. Now, if we combine these three facts together, the tremendous influence of religion on behaviors and attitudes, the very powerful role of religious institutions as providers of social services for many, many millions of people around the world, and the very strong relationship between the religious and the political, or at least the influences between these two parts of the world or two aspects of our lives. For these three reasons alone, we will have to understand that religious actors, which includes religious leaders, religious institutions like churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, etc., and religious non-governmental organizations or religious civil society, actually have a very powerful role to play in the context of our global environment. So whether it's on the level of influencing politics and policies, whether it's on the level of influencing the way that average human beings in a family, in a community, in a nation will need to change their behaviors in order to try to save whatever remains of our environment, or whether it's on the level of being able to use the existing social service infrastructure, the health, infrastructure, the educational infrastructure. On all three levels, religious actors have a very important role to play. One of the examples of the connection between the religious and the environmental, from the perspective of Religions for Peace, is the example of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. Why is that a noteworthy example? It's a noteworthy example because we know for a fact, again, that the rainforests of the world are actually in many ways the lungs of our planet. Of course, there is much difference of opinion. Are they exactly like the lungs? Is there other things that make it lungs? Let's just assume, for the sake of argument now, that the rainforests, the role that the forests play in safeguarding the very oxygen on this planet is hugely significant and important. So saving the rainforests from the current disastrous deforestation that is taking place. And why do we call it disastrous? Because 70% of the world's rainforests has already been eliminated. Let me repeat that. 70% of the world's rainforest have already been eliminated. Now, if we think, and we know the data that says that the rainforests are what keeps our air clear, clean, and alive, realize, therefore, that 70% of what keeps the air on this planet clean, clear, and alive is gone. So, an initiative that brings together all the faith communities, and remember that the rainforests are the home to the indigenous peoples. The rainforests are the home of the indigenous peoples, but they are also the sacred space. They are the mosques and synagogues and temples of the indigenous peoples. So an initiative that brings together these rainforest protectors, those who see the rainforest as sacred to them, the indigenous peoples, with the churches and the mosques and the synagogues and the temples, with the secular policymakers at the local governance level, at the national governance levels, and at the global governance levels, with human rights actors, with parliamentarians and policymakers. Imagine this coalition that also includes women and interfaith youth. Imagine the power of such coalitions, all designed to protect the rainforest. It is a remarkable power because it is the power of all of society. At the same time, when you consider that 70% of our rainforests are already gone, it doesn't become, oh, wonderful, what a remarkable power. It becomes, thank goodness that those who see truth are ready, willing, and able to come together to serve it. The Interfaith Rainforest Initiative is a coalition of actors that leaves no interest behind and no stakeholder outside, from the indigenous peoples to the senior most secular policymakers in any given society. Indonesia is one of the instances where there is an Interfaith Rainforest Initiative that is being put together in order to try to save the Indonesian rainforest. It's a very critical initiative and a very powerful one. It is also a very complicated endeavor because by the very definition, an alliance is the world's biggest challenge. We find it so difficult sometimes within our own families to see eye to eye and to agree to work together. It is therefore so much more difficult to bring together so many different stakeholders, each stakeholder group very diverse. The indigenous peoples, for instance, as one aspect of those stakeholders, don't always agree or see eye to eye on everything. Now, bring the indigenous with the churches and the mosques and the synagogues, and you can immediately see not everybody is going to see eye to eye. Alliance building is as complicated as it is necessary, and yet it is precisely what has to happen. And it cannot be that churches alone, even if every single church in Indonesia, as an example, were to come together and agree, it would not be enough to save the rainforests in Indonesia. Because it has to be a coalition of multiple partners. It has to be many faiths and institutional representatives. It has to be the secular with the religious and the multi-religious, the human rights with the policymakers and the governance. This is the quintessential threat that we face. Yes, we are facing an environmental crisis, but the largest threat to saving our environment is actually ourselves, because we find it very difficult to form alliances for specific purposes, no matter how life-threatening it can be. And yet, this is exactly what we must do. This is exactly what we have to do. Religions have to overcome, and faiths have to overcome their differences. Not only that, but they have to work through the differences with the governments, which is challenging enough, as well as with other civil society actors. This is the challenge of our time. The environment is only a symptom of the challenges of our time. For this reason, Religions for Peace, which, as I hope some of you know, is at least a 50-year-old multi-religious international organization, decided when they came together, the leadership came together from across the world in 2019, to ensure that nurturing a sustainable environment was one of the 6 strategic priorities for the next 5 years. Nurturing a sustainable environment is a critical element, and indeed, while I have shared with you one of the flagship initiatives, which is the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, there are many other initiatives that are taking place globally and around the world where religions are coming together to serve. What distinguishes Religions for Peace's approach from other multi-religious initiatives is precisely the insistence on religions working together through their institutions and through their non-governmental entities. So it is not enough to have well-meaning individuals working together. It is necessary, but it is insufficient. It is absolutely necessary for the religious institutions to work with the political and other civil society institutions. And this is why it can become incredibly difficult. However, the good news is that we have seen and continue to see on a regular basis women and youth, and of course some women are youth and some youth are women, but we have seen these 2 constituencies the most willing to work together. When COVID 2019 hit us as a global pandemic in 2020, we realized very, very clearly that we had to insist, as an organization that is global in scope, we had to insist on providing support, financial support, for communities that are willing and able to work together across their differences. In other words, we created a multi-religious humanitarian fund to provide support for those from different faith traditions who wanted and could work together to serve their communities at this time of great need. Till today, very few religious institutions have actually contributed to this fund. That's an interesting point in and of itself, but perhaps a separate point for another conversation. What I do want to share with you is that we realize that 90% of those applying for support from the fund were young people and women of faith. So 90% of the proposals that we received, and we received many, 90% came from women of faith and from interfaith youth communities and groups. Why? because the religious institutions, the established religious institutions, already have their own humanitarian means, mechanisms, and resources. But very rarely do these mechanisms and means and resources of the respective large religious institutions and actors, very rarely are these made available to those who wish to work across religions. Very often, these will be made available to other organizations from the same community or from the same belief system. The recipients of the humanitarian support are from everywhere. But those who receive the support or the resources to carry out humanitarian initiatives, in 99.9% of the cases, the recipients of their support of money to do humanitarian work are actually from within the same communities that are giving the money. So Religions for Peace effectively found itself with its fund as the only fund that was willing to give money to multiple religious actors willing to work together. Therefore, the multi-religious humanitarian fund. And therefore, the import that many of those young and women of faith networks, if they went separately, if the Muslim women, for instance, went to certain Muslim associations, they were likely to get support. If the Christian women went to certain Christian associations, they were likely to get support. But if they wanted to work together from the very beginning to do something together, they couldn't necessarily get support from either the Christian or the Muslim, but they can get support from the multi-religious humanitarian fund, because that does insist that it has to be people from different communities working together. So we found unexpectedly that it was a benefit for young women wanting to work together and for young people wanting to work together in their communities. So I go back to the statistics that 90% of those who applied were women and young people from different religious communities. In other words, the motor for multi-religious action does not necessarily lie in religious institutions, but it most certainly can and is found amongst the young people and the youth of the world. Another discovery was that 70% of those applying, of the proposals, were applying to do work. Now remember, this is about COVID. This is the response to COVID. 70% of those applying were applying to do initiatives that had to do with ensuring that there was clean water, food, things being delivered. People who, some of the young people thought that they supported planting, nurturing in gardens so that people could start planting their own and getting their access to their own vegetables and learning how to plant together and learning how to access some of the vegetables because they were not able to go to the different markets, or because this was a way of being able to use the little money that they have in a more sustainable manner, and thinking with a long-term vision that having your own vegetables grown in your own gardens where possible was actually able to save them money in the future as well. Very creative initiatives that had actually to do with the environment. So in spite of the fact that this was different ways to confront the COVID pandemic, we realized that many of those initiatives or proposals were thinking and targeting environmental needs and contexts. So we learned a few good lessons in Religions for Peace, and we learned how valuable it was to be deliberate in supporting multi-religious initiatives that are in many cases very innovative. And even though it is about confronting a disease, in fact, thanks to the innovation of many of these young people, it was indeed confronting the epidemic or the pandemic, but it was confronting the pandemic with a view to things to do that are futuristic in orientation and futures. So very valuable for us to have realized that if we wish to confront a common challenge to all of us, it may well be that we will have to depend on the incentive, innovation, and perhaps relative fearlessness of the younger generations who are willing to experiment and perhaps not as fearful certainly not as bound to their institutions, whether political or religious or social, and more adventurous in terms of being willing to work together and to experiment and to be much more knowledgeable about the technology of today. It is a fact that the younger generation is much more knowledgeable technologically and much more savvy. So therefore, to confront our particular catastrophes of this time, we do need those who are much more smart in the use of technology. That means that this particular age group, this youth cohort that we currently have, and please remember that the largest demographic in terms of population is youth and elderly. And it's going to have to be the youth that look after the elderly. So when we know that technology can be a very key tipping point, those who can master the technology have an even more important and critical role to play. So we talk about the value added of multi-religious because that is the whole of the society, because that is the key to social cohesion, as well as acknowledge and accept that if we are to activate technology for the good, then multi-religious youth engagement becomes not a luxury, but actually a necessity in this space. This was also a lesson that we learned from a conference that we hosted in Lindau, Germany, which was called Generations in Dialogue. Effectively, it was about faith and diplomacy. Those were the main themes. But the most significant thing perhaps about this conference was that it brought together different generations of faithful people from different communities around the world to discuss and debate with one another. The most significant challenges of being diplomats in an age where faith is either used to justify war, as we see happening in the Ukraine, or the key mechanism to try to bring about peace, as we see in many parts of Indonesia. We are also, for that reason, convening together with the City Council of Manresa in Spain, a major conference, bringing together and looking at the role of youth in environmental dynamics today. As Religions for Peace, there is an understanding that we no longer have the luxury of believing that religion doesn't matter or it can be put on the side. At the same time, we no longer have the luxury of assuming that it is only the older generation that will save the younger one or save the earth for the younger one. In fact, it seems very, very clear that it is the younger generation which will need to save the earth, full stop. I leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Azza, for the enlightening speech. Before we move on to the question and answer session, I would allow me to highlight some of your points. First of all, you mentioned that religious institutions indeed have been providing good services all across the globe, but it's undeniable that religions are becoming political nowadays because religions, well, I will say religious institutions and politics have become, in your language, bedfellows. But no matter what, alliance building is really important, although it's very complicated. And you also mentioned the crucial role of indigenous groups, either indigenous groups or indigenous faith groups. Well, that is very complicated because I have conflicting thoughts about this when I was listening to you, because in the field that I have been seeing for the past 1 year, the most impacted groups from all of this grant investment that the Indonesian government has been nurturing will be indigenous groups, and also they are not really recognized. So that's another issue that we are facing at the moment. But no matter what, nurturing the sustainable environment is really critical. And you also highlight that nowadays there is this rising involvement of role of women and youth in humanitarian efforts. And you mentioned the Interfaith Rainforest initiative, which has been seeing rising or more applicants from young people, and or women groups. So it is undeniable that the model for multi-religious action are among the young people and women. Do we already have questions from the audience? Otherwise, apakah ada kawan yang mau bertanya atau just comment? Oh ya, monggo Pak.
Ya, terima kasih. Good evening, Professor Azza Karam. So I heard a lot of your name because I'm one of the kind of founder here in the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative in Indonesia. So I'm leading the launching of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative in Indonesia in 2020, just before the COVID. So I'm working closely with Ben Mius and your team and Charles from UNEP. So we have been so now about 2 years. 2 years we are working together on this one, and we still kind of have difficulties. And one of the difficulties in executing the multi-faith or interfaith environmental issue is in the prioritization of the what you call the religious leader, because religious leader has so many issues they have to tackle, and how to put this environmental issue as the top priority. So that's actually the difficult one. And the why is that become existence, because the knowledge of these religious leaders or religious people normally, that as you know, that Indonesia, about 72% of the people, or we are the highest unbelievers of climate change here in the world. So how to make the people aware that this is important, that's become issue for us. And fortunately, I'm invited to the UNEP currently. I'm still in the online course on the Faith for Earth, on the Faith for Earth initiative training. It emphasizes the importance of faith and secular actors working together by drawing on the particular qualities of scientifically guided and faith-inspired action. So the issue here in Indonesia that we face on the ground is that we need not only working together with interfaith, but we need also not also to academician, but also we need to work together with NGOs, because academician just academician, but the one who work on the field is the NGOs. So somehow that the approach needs to be, one is the scientific. Scientific is not only the scientific on the environmental issues, but also scientific on how to approach the people on the ground, how to influence the people. So this kind of knowledge needs to be understood by us, because it is different influence people through the faith, what you call the preacher, and how to influence the people on the environmental issue. So I'm fortunate that I'm following this module that just launched last Monday, and I'm just finishing this 8 weeks online course, and I'm just finishing the 2 modules. So I just want you to be aware that in the application or implementation of Interfaith Rainforest Initiative in Indonesia, we have struggling and on the ground, not only funding but also the execution. So just commenting about that. Thank you. Probably you have the comments. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Azza.
Did you,
Azza, you may
Yeah.
like directly respond to that. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Well, actually, my response is first of all to say thank you to Mr. Prabowo for delineating the challenges being faced in the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative in Indonesia. I think you have captured them all very, very well. One of the most resonating things that you mentioned is that this is still remains a nation of skeptics about environmental catastrophes. And there are examples of how skepticism like this, and also ignorance, has been dealt with religious actors in other contexts about other issues. And I think the openness to learning from other contexts is in and of itself very valuable and very helpful. We know for a fact that, for instance, in the example of HIV and AIDS, there was a tremendous amount of skepticism about what this disease was, how it impacted on people, whether it was indeed genuine or not, whether it was brought in by the outside world, whether it was made a big fuss of just as for political reasons. You may remember in the 1980s and 90s that there was a very intense degree of skepticism about this. And yet there were some very clear scientific facts. The skepticism about this disease in the religious and among the religious community was particularly high. In fact, the religious leaders were amongst the first to stigmatize people who lived with HIV and AIDS, to stigmatize and marginalize. So there was a very big need for making clear what the science itself said, what were the scientific facts. And I think this still remains a very critical part, because you will find that, for instance, in the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative efforts in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there are some very similar challenges where religious leaders and religious institutions are very skeptical about the need to save the rainforest when there are so many other very pressing needs, including war and armed conflict, that people have to live through, where there's no food for the average person, and so on and so forth. But I think being able to bring the scientific facts to the religious leaders like yourselves and others. You mention the Faith for Earth module. That doesn't cost much. In fact, it costs very little. It costs a computer and an access to the internet. But such means of bringing the scientific data, the evidence, and also some suggestions for what can be done are not very costly and don't require much money. So I think your points are absolutely relevant and absolutely valid. But I also think that there's much to learn from how religious leaders in particular managed to overcome similar situations in other contexts. One of the most successful Interfaith Rainforest Initiative attempts is currently in Colombia, in Latin America. There's much to learn from that. And in Religions for Peace, we're very keen on being able to now get the different Interfaith Rainforest initiatives to learn from one another, how they are confronting sometimes very similar challenges. But to the skepticism of religious leaders, there is only one solution, which is to insist on providing the scientific data in a way that is accessible, understandable, and comprehensible. And I think this is something that we may need to consider how to do. If you have any ideas, please feel free to suggest them, but also to let us know that this would be an area that would be worth addressing more specifically in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Azza. There is also a comment, more or less, from one of our participants on the column chat from Pak Samuel Asebles. He mentioned that he's from Papua, and he mentioned that in current time, they are serving more or less 500 patients from 24 sub-districts in FIF. FIF is the capital city of Tambrau Regency in West Papua. And they are not only discussing about loves in the discourse, like the abstract level, but also how to translate love in actions, like what they are doing in the periphery or the apa ya, outskirts of Papua, West Papua, and how they raise initiatives in the conservation area and embracing multi-sector stakeholders. Perhaps I think this is interesting. Maybe we can ask Pak Samuel Bless to enlighten us a little bit more about the initiatives that his organization is doing. Pak Samuel Bless, if you're still with us here, would you like to tell us more by yourself? Yeah, that might inspire others. Pak Samuel Bless ada di sini nggak masih? Otherwise, we can jump into another questions. I can see there's one who raises his hands.
Hello, yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Pak Samuel Bless, are you there? Do you want to?
I'm here.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us yourself what you have been doing with your organization there?
Yes, thank you for the time. Right now, we are making sales for the health service in the FEF. FEF is the capital of the Amrau Regency. This is the area of the conservation. And the real condition is many people is their life in the periphery area is more isolated. And we are from the alumni of the Gajah Mada University, organized by us. And in current time, we serve the people like the minor operation and other service for the people with life in the area of the conservation. And I hope this meeting is very interesting for us. We are called to make some studies, or research to the how about the condition of the real of the people in the periphery area, and mostly of the other hand, they conserve the natural, they keep our planets, but the other hand, they are life in the limit of the surface, limit of the health and the other here, welfare. It needs our core together. We do not just discuss about the dialogue, about the law without the action. This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Samuel Bless. Yeah. So we have one participant who has raised his hands, and we also have another questions on the column chat. But I will give the chance for Ignas Asis first to post his question. Silakan Kak Ignas.
Ini dokter kali kalau tambahnya gila.
Silakan Kak Ignas, boleh langsung bahasa Indonesia atau mau bahasa Inggris juga boleh.
Suara saya kedengaran, Kak?
Kedengaran, ya, we can hear you.
Ya, saya akan bertanya. I think like this, dedicate self for prosperity of others, like prosperity for human and for nature, needs deep commitment, sincerity, and good and glorious motivation. I want to ask like this. This is based on the phenomenon that I learned and also I saw, which is amplified in social media every day. We live in an age which is signified by short-time economy logic. This is shown by the mentality which is signified by thinking that work little but make a lot of profit. And the social media amplify this by always showing the phenomenon of great reach of young people. So everything that I will do should bring for me a little profit economically, socially, and culturally. I want to ask like this, how could like myself and other young people form themselves so that they will not be infected by this instant virus. Because for me, this is the danger of short-time logic, which has become the epistemic of this age. Thank you, Prof. This is my question.
Sorry, Azza, before you answer that question, there is another question that is slightly similar, I think. So I think it's better to just give it to you so that you can answer both directly. Another question from Dr. Rain Goulton is slightly similar with Ignas. His question is, what can we do together to save the environment? What are possible multi-sector or multi-stakeholders effort to implement the environmental awareness? That's from Rain Goulton, and from Ignas is more or less like how can the youth protect themselves from profit seeking agenda out there that is distributed, especially in the social media world. Azza?
Well, I think my first set of responses would be that if I knew the answers to all of this, I wouldn't be doing the job I'm doing now. I would be doing a very different job. I don't know what, but something much more significant. But here's a suggestion for you to consider. One of the things that we are noticing, as I shared with you earlier, is in fact that there is a hunger for young people to work together, especially to in spite of the differences, especially because they want to work with one another, precisely because they come from different religions, different regions, different whatever. So there's a hunger amongst the youth to be active, to be relevant, and to be proactive and work in solidarity with one another. So I would invite you to check out the Global Interfaith Youth Network of Religions for Peace, and to see how you can, if you're interested, become part of this network. And you may be attracted by something global, but I think you can actually look at how to work with one another with the Religions for Peace Youth Network in Indonesia. There should be such a network. I take it some of you must have been aware of it. If you don't know it, I'm fairly sure that Dr. Elga Sarapong knows some members of this network, but why not use this network as a hub to connect with one another and to see what you can actually do together? There is only one antidote to, at least in my opinion, I don't speak for the whole organization, but in my humble opinion, there's only one antidote to the fear of being corrupted and co-opted by unproductive forces, shall we say. And that antidote is to actually serve together, to serve your communities together. That's the only antidote against the increasing desire for individualism, for supremacy thinking, for inferiority thinking, for a sense of irrelevance. It actually is to work together, to serve, to give, as opposed to wanting to receive, to get. It's actually to give. And if you think about it, almost every single faith tradition known to humankind demands that we give. It doesn't say sit there and take. It says give, serve, give, serve. That's a very fine antidote to that fear that we have, very legitimate fear and very wise fear of being seduced by a profit-seeking mentality. Serve and serve together. And so I invite you to join the Interfaith Youth Network of Religions for Peace. If there isn't one in Indonesia, which I doubt very much, there is, see it, meet the people, get to know them, serve, volunteer. I also wanted to suggest, and this is something that the Religions for Peace board approved last year, that of course we have the Indonesian Interreligious Council. We also have the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. We have the youth networks. So there's multiple spaces, and we have right now an interest in seeing friends of religions for peace communities, groups. Friends of religions for peace does not mean friends of the organization as much as it means friends of the mission and the principles of working multi-religiously together. If you're interested in that kind of a structure or a body or an aspiration, come together, those of you on this one call, and make yourselves available to one another, to work together, to be friends of religions working together for peace. It's a concrete effort. And last but by no means least, I am really struck by how we heard from Pak Prabowo that there is this challenge of getting the religious leaders and religious institutions to work together to save the rainforests. And at the same time, I'm hearing from many of you that there is a need to work together for a common purpose. So why not connect with Mr. Hayu Prabowo and see how those of you who are interested in working for environmental issues can actually help the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative and can be interlocutors with the religious leaders who are skeptical. How can you serve to bring the science, the message, the evidence, the truth, and to call upon the religious leaders to be much more active? There is much need. There are many existing infrastructures. Join them and work through them.
Thank you, Azza. Ada yang mau bertanya lagi nggak, teman-teman? Atau mungkin beri komentar? Do we have any more questions or anyone wants to share thoughts or comments or maybe lesson learned from your experience or your troublesome heart seeing what we are facing at the moment regarding climate? Or okay, while waiting for our participants to come up with more questions, probably it's good, Azza, if you sort of like explain a little bit more about this Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, or like, is there any Indonesians there? And then you also mentioned, for me, this is really interesting that 19% of the applicants for the funds are from young. Probably you can provide us like 1 or 2 examples of what the applicants have applied for us to inspire our young people here who probably might come up with proposals or ideas later to you.
Okay, so I spoke about 2 different things. I said that we have created a multi-religious humanitarian fund, and I gave the example of the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, which is an existing multi-stakeholder, obviously multi-religious initiative to save the rainforests. They are not one and the same, they are 2 separate initiatives. But I gave the example of the applicants to the fund that showed how much willingness and innovation and creativity to serve multi-religiously came from the younger people. So that many of the applications, I think it was about, what did I mention? It was 90% or so actually came from young people. So there were so many ideas and initiatives from, as I was mentioning, setting up, identifying where there was plots of land that could be used to grow vegetables on them, and getting communities to actually start growing their own vegetable needs in different, in specific countries, to how to effectively supply. Remember, this was in 2020, so it was at the height of the lockdowns that were taking place globally, and there was a serious shortage of basic things like gloves and masks and so on. So many of these proposals were trying to marry supply and demand. They identified where there was additional cloth, where there were women and young people who could sew, and bring them together with whatever specifications hospitals needed in order to actually make more masks available to the hospitals and the clinics who were lacking. There were suggestions and proposals of actually mapping, in some countries, mapping where the households in different communities, in different neighborhoods, who had people, elderly people living with disabilities in them, and that during the lockdown, they were losing their main sources of the breadwinners who were not able to go out, and therefore they weren't able to find food and medications. And the young people provided, came up with a system of deliveries to these households which were lacking some of that basic care. So they came up with organizing, first of all, identifying and mapping which were the most vulnerable households, and making sure that this mapping was made available to their local officials so that they could make sure that they would identify where the particularly vulnerable communities or households were. Then coming up with different plans and strategies of actually delivering basic needs in terms of nutrition, sanitation, and medication to these households. So it was such a variety of, and some of the things that you wouldn't even have thought about. Others did things like special podcasts to interview religious leaders, young people interviewing religious leaders about the virus, the transmission, what does it mean, what happens, how do you prevent, what does the religion say, etc., etc. So many different initiatives, and they were all, like I said, 90% of them were youth driven and youth inspired and youth managed, actually. And they served communities. That was the basic purpose. And they worked together across their religious affiliations. So that is, I think, what was the most inspiring lesson learned. And in many instances, after the young people had already started their projects, then the religious leaders became involved. In some cases, because they felt this was really good stuff. They should be seen to be blessing it or connected to it, or even creators of it themselves. So it actually, in some ways, also encouraged, I'm being very polite, encouraged religious leaders to become more involved in working together and supporting some of these initiatives than would have been the case before.
Thank you. It's also interesting about the Interfaith Rainforest initiative. I suppose the initiatives also sees quite a number of religious leaders, in the committee or in the management, quote unquote. And we know for sure, I don't know with the context of other countries, but in Indonesia, religious leaders are also somehow politicians. I would like to know your thoughts about how we can make sure when a religious leaders act as a religious leader, but not as a politician. Like, how can we ensure their commitment as religious leaders and not going political and make things worse with this whole argument and invested interest?
I think it's a great question, and it's one of the questions that came up during the intergenerational conference that we hosted in October of last year. And it was very, very clear. Two things came out very clearly as imperatives in terms of recommendations for action. The first is that very often we tend to see religious leaders as the sources of truth and wisdom, and so the deference is from us to our religious leaders, no? And so very rarely do we think in terms of how we as believers who are of different generations, how we can hold our religious leaders accountable. Like, what does that even mean, right? So the in a way, that culture now is changing, where you see there's more, for some it's courage, for others it's audacity, depends on where you stand in that spectrum, but there is more courage / audacity to challenge religious leaders from the very same communities that they are meant to lead. And more, that is coming from the young people. The extreme version of this challenge to religious leaders is unfortunately what we see happening in terms of religiously motivated violence, right? So the very extreme example of this kind of challenge is what we see happening with the ISIS or whatever, because that fundamentally, this is a hugely violent challenge to the status quo. It's a challenge to the existing religious leaders, because they're being told, nonsense, you're talking nonsense, you are irrelevant, everything you have to say is not true, and we will now have truth, we will now impose this truth, right? That is actually a very extreme example of challenging existing religious institutions and religious leaders, right? Now, one doesn't need to go that far at all, but there is and therefore the whole theme of the conference was faith and diplomacy. Why diplomacy? Because it is about challenging leaders, political and religious, in a way that remains civil and tactful and respectful, but it is nevertheless a challenge to the authority of certain institutions, both political and religious. And I think that is, and you could see it happening in front of our own eyes. Why were we seeing it happen? Because we were not just convening the religious leaders alone, and then the youth alone, and then the women of faith alone, which was actually the experience of Religions for Peace for the last 50 years. All of these constituencies were convened, but they were convened separately. And in this conference, we were very deliberate about saying, no, everybody comes as an equal to the same stage, the same table, and they talk with one another as equals, right? So it was intergenerational in nature. And I think it's that intergenerational method of conversing that is very fundamental to holding our religious institutions and our political institutions, our religious leaders and our political leaders accountable. It's the intergenerational nature of the conversation. It's not just the elderly talking to the elderly, or the young talking to the young, or the young talking to the elderly, but it is the intergenerational nature. It's also very critical to have conversations with protagonists who are not only different generations, but also coming from different viewpoints, different ethnicities, different religions, and different genders. Having these elements of diversity simultaneously on a level playing field of conversational tables or spaces or town halls or whatever makes a tremendous amount of difference to the idea of holding accountable those in positions of authority.
Thank you, Azza. I can see that we have more of our participants are raising hands. I'll give the first chance to our friend Sue Anis from Australia, perhaps, or am I wrong?
Yes, from Australia. Thank you for inviting me today. Azza, I was very struck by, we are the largest threat to ourselves that you said. And last year I had to give a paper for RFP Asia Women's Meeting. And what I spoke to people about this, and they said, what's been happening, we've been putting environment here and peace education, conflict resolution skills here. And that in fact, in a lot of the stuff we're doing, and I've learned the hard way that I need to develop my environmental skills and my interpersonal skills, conflict resolution and strategy, as well as my faith community, my faith skills of regularly attending my faith community, having support, because this stuff is hard. And interreligiously, it is, I'm working across faiths as well on climate issues. So I'd like that comment. The second comment is the theology which we have in religious, I've seen it in Australia, as well as I do research and Islam. I've seen it in Australia too. God will provide our environment. God will help us in the future. And there are a lot of religious leaders and religious communities who believe this. And this is sort of stops us acting across the world. Not all of us, because many of us are doing things like we're seeing here. And the other thing, I think a lot of the young have much better conflict resolution skills through the education system. And I'm sure this is the sort of thing people are doing in Indonesia than older generations of religious leaders and others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can I quickly affirm everything you've said? I would make a small caveat about a lot of the young have better conflict resolution skills. To be honest, I think that there is, let's say, and this was one of the points that came through in terms of all the different initiatives that are being championed and pioneered by younger generations around the world. You can see them most clearly in humanitarian contexts, right? Because that's the immediate, the urgent. It's not a long-term thing. It's like we have to respond now, and here's what we're going to do. So you can begin to see, indeed, the array of creative and innovative, like I said earlier, and also technologically savvy ways of responding. I think the issue is, and it's not to say that the young people don't, in fact they do, but I think that what the tipping point for what we must see as a transformed institutional and behavioral set of responses that takes into account the value added of conflict resolution skills and intentionality within our environment. The tipping point, I believe, if I may, Sue, is that it takes that intergenerational savvy. It takes that intergenerational approach. And if you leave it to the young people alone, I don't think that's important, but that's insufficient. It is precisely that there is a wisdom behind everything we are confronted today. And there must be a wisdom to the fact that the largest demographies globally, and this applies in Indonesia, as it applies in Japan, as it applies in the United States, as it applies in Peru, and certainly in China, the largest two population demographics are young and old, right? So there's a reason for that. I think there's a deeper wisdom to it. And I believe that the deeper wisdom is that these two have to work together for one another. That leaving one to sort out their issues and the other to tackle their issues will not work. And so much of our approach in international development, for instance, has been to say, yes, we now recognize that young people are very important. Wonderful. So let us create fora for young people to come together and to mobilize and to do whatever they need to do. That is fine. That is wonderful, but in and of itself, insufficient. And it won't be a situation where the young people will solve their own problems, because the young people coexist with older people. And there is a mutual responsibility. And there may well be young people who are very savvy in conflict resolution, but we also know that young people happen to be the first and largest cohort of extremist violent groups. So no, it's not all rosy. And it's not exactly the same argument that we say, well, religions are going to solve it. Religions really will solve it. No, they don't solve it, because religions on their own have the good and the not so good in them and among them. So it's that you have to hybridize. We have to bring together different constituencies. So in terms of generations, whether young or old, we have to speak and we have to manufacture the contexts in which it's an intergenerational set of perspective, but also set of approaches, because no one generation has the answer. No one generation has an extremely intense skill in one thing or the other, including in conflict resolution. So I really just want to emphasize that point a little bit further, just to nuance exactly what you were saying, but to realize that it's an intergenerational approach. The fatalism of the religious, God will provide. Happily, I don't think many of the young people believe it. I think it's also something that the older generation would like to believe in, quite frankly. God will provide, perhaps, but I think every single faith tradition, including indigenous people's ways of thinking, insists that you must work, and then there will that you sow, and what you sow you reap. But you must sow. Plants don't just come out of you must sow. And I think that notion of having to sow in order to reap is fundamental to all faith traditions and counters this idea that God will, we can do all the mess we want, but God will provide. No, it doesn't work like that.
That's a great message, Azam. Yeah, in addition to intergenerational partnership, we also need partnership with the divine. Yeah, so not just pray, but also take your action. Yeah, thank you. Can we take more questions, Azam?
Please.
Yeah. There is a participant from the Baha'i community, Mas Hanif Haidir. Mas Hanif, silakan kalau mau tanya.
Thank you. My voice is clear, Mbak Margaret?
Yes, clear.
Thank you, Azza, for your lecture today. Enlighten us for the topic that we discussed. First, I'm agree that's actually the religion gives us to such knowledge about giving and service. So another side, and also provide us that we are, if we realize that we are spiritual existence, that service is our attitude, as our attribute. So in other words, I'm also saying that if the goal of human have stepped into the kingdom of existence from absolute nothingness, is that they may work for betterment of the world and living together in harmony. So I think that you mentioned it regarding that discussing today, that's point. The second, I want to see that you mentioned about the woman, youth, and leader. And so I was thinking that actually if we can look, it's one of us is the protagonist. It means we don't see the position, because actually if each one of us is the leader for our action. So if we can think that everyone is the protagonist, how we bring room for each one can make action according to what level they can give. So you mentioned about the family, you also mentioned it about the school and others and institution. So the second point is I can got from you is each one of us is protagonist. So can take action according to what we can. So in other words, I'm seeing about that each one seems like a cell of humanity body. So how cell connecting one another, how they are working together. So if they're connecting and working together, they can create the health community, health environment, and other. Of course, the education and knowledge is necessary too. Another point that I got from you and also from another reference, that's actually the betterment of climate change need to coherence between principles and action, because this is connected with another. Another thing is about the science and logic. Another point that I will see is not only that one, but also the requirement, courage, and sacrifice. So it's one of us required to ask to ourselves what courage and sacrifice that we can contribute to betterment of the world. So to this one, it's one take action, because we see it's one of protagonists. So another is courage and sacrifice according what we can do. What do you think about this one? Thank you, Asa.
I think that's a much better lecture than what I said, to be honest. You have captured brilliantly and eloquently all the main points and added your own brilliant points. The only nuance that I would say, and I'm thinking out loud here with you, is yes, we are each protagonists, of course. We are each agents, but on our own, we can't do it. We can't save the planet. We are fundamentally interdependent on one another. And not only are we interdependent on one another, but we are interdependent on this earth, on every blade of grass, every leaf, every stem. We are interdependent on. And I think that's the thinking that many of our religions, perhaps as they have been taught, don't emphasize enough. Whereas the indigenous faiths emphasize very clearly, that's the starting point of all indigenous faiths, that before there was this human being, there was this incredible earth that led to, that brought it, that made it possible for humanity. So then the responsibility of every human towards this earth is fundamental. Whereas with most of the religions, it's the responsibility towards God. But for most of the indigenous faiths, the responsibility is towards this earth, right here, this is it. So there's no distancing between person or people and earth, no distancing. There's an interdependency exactly in the same way that we think of God in Islam or Christianity or Judaism or any other religion, we think of God. But for the most basic of many indigenous is God is this earth, this planet. That's it. That's the sacred. Yes. And I think that point is, yes, every one of us has a responsibility, every single one of us, and an agency. But we also must acknowledge that that is to this earth. And so as we worship the divine, we have to understand that the divine is this earth too. This earth too lives and is a divine. And that I would say needs to be brought out much more in terms of the way we see our world, in terms of our own worldview. I would add that to your brilliant points.
Thank you, Azza. Is there anyone like one last question or one last comment before we conclude this comment and question and answer session? From anyone? One last person to say anything? No? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I agree with Professor Nyoman Kirsia. This is a brilliant and great discussion. Thank you very much, Azza. And I can see that we have 107 participants, and all of them are like staying for almost 2 hours discussion. So brilliant. Before we move on to the next session, I just would like to highlight some great points and concluding remarks from Professor Azza's speech, that the main point for us now is to serve together, go against what the world is teaching us, which is individualism and you as a center of the universe, which is not working in terms of saving the environment. So today, Professor Azza is inviting us to know ourselves better, that we have the power to create the change that we want to see in terms of making a sustainable environment. And we can, one highlight that really touches me from Professor Azza is we can't save the world on our own. Because we are inherently dependent on each other and on this earth. And when we are worshiping God, God is the earth. So that's the point. I think we have 2 participants of this interfaith school that would like to share their reflections with us. Silakan. Mas.
Baik, selamat pagi untuk kita semua. Selamat pagi untuk kita semua.
Ya, selamat pagi, Mas.
Kepada Profesor
Maya, Acen.
Ya, kali ini saya yang akan menyampaikan refleksi saya dari hasil pemaparan materi dari Profesor Azza Karam. Saya akan berefleksi di sini.
Mas mungkin bisa perkenalkan diri dulu biar Prof Azza juga dan
Ya, menggunakan bahasa Indonesia ya.
Ya.
Kepada Profesor Azza Karam, saya ucapkan terima kasih atas sharing yang sungguh menggugah. Penjelasan tadi memberi inspirasi bagi saya secara khusus dalam melihat dan menanggapi isu-isu terkait lingkungan. Ada hal yang secara khusus menggugat saya untuk bermenung secara mendalam tadi ketika pembicaranya terkait komunitas-komunitas agama yang mempunyai sumbangsi penting dalam menjaga kedamaian dunia. Tetapi lebih lanjutnya ada penegasan bahwa komunitas-komunitas agama bisa dikatakan masih sedikit kurang aktif atau kurang kompak dalam pelaksanaan itu. Kebetulan posisi saya juga saat ini sebagai anggota rohaniwan yang berpartisipasi dalam Gereja Katolik. Hal ini kemudian menyadarkan diri saya untuk bertanya lebih jauh. Sudah sejauh mana saya melibatkan diri dalam aksi merawat lingkungan tentunya. Karena saya merasa diri masih banyak hal yang kurang saya lakukan atau justru tanpa disadari, dan ini mungkin hal paling umum dilakukan oleh semua orang ketika mereka membuat salah atau menjadi pelaku perusak lingkungan itu sendiri tanpa mereka sadari. Tentu saja persoalan yang tadi diangkat di sini karena kurangnya kesadaran yang kemudian berimbas ke seluruh aspek kehidupan manusia, terlebih khusus saya sendiri. Tidak mau membangun passion untuk merawat lingkungan itu sendiri. Sejalan dengan apa yang sudah Profesor bagikan hari ini, saya jadi mengingat kembali undangan atau ajakan dari pemateri sebelum-sebelumnya, sekaligus ini mempertegas keyakinan saya. Mereka mengingatkan saya bahwa sebagai kaum muda yang juga adalah anggota rohaniwan, saya harus mampu bertindak berdasarkan pemikiran yang kritis dalam memperjuangkan pelestarian alam. Maksudnya jika saya beriman kepada Tuhan, iman kepada Tuhan tidak hanya sampai pada saya berdoa untuk menjaga kelestarian alam, tetapi harus wujud dalam tindakan untuk menjaga kelestarian alam. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Absolutely. Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. One little suggestion. I hear that you're a Catholic youth and you're very active within your respective community. Make a point of reaching out to other youth, Indigenous youth, Christian youth, Hindu youth, Buddhist youth, and work with them. Come up with things that you can do together and make it a point of living your faith that you serve with other religious youth, because it's only one earth. It really is only one earth, and it's for all of us, and we all have to look after it. Make a point of trying to do that. And there's in the Religions for Peace. Ask Dr. Elga. She knows everything about Religions for Peace and more. Ask her how to get involved with the youth. Make a point of asking. Thank you.
A new task.
Ya, thank you, Mas Acen ya tadi itu ya.
Frater Acen dari Sanata Dharma.
Frater, maafkan saya orang Katolik yang tidak bisa mengenali Frater. Thank you, Frater. Before we move to another participant, I just want to make sure that I just want to highlight that Acen share what Acen shared with us. He mentioned that this whole lecture has sort of like talked to him personally in criticizing his own faith, like when he was praying for the environment. It's not only like pray, but now he has been invited how to translate his faith into action, in real action, to contribute in making a more sustainable environment. Yeah. Do we have Mas Valen with us to share his thoughts or reflections from the Interfaith school experience? Mas Valen? Sorry.
It will be Ilma, Kak, from Bahaya.
Oh, Ilma. Sorry. Oh ya, Ilma, Mbak Ilma ya? Mbak apa Mas Ilma nih? Silahkan.
Terima kasih atas kesempatannya.
Perkenalkan,
nama saya Ilma Yanti Narsisus, bisa dipanggil Ilma. Saya dari agama Bahai. Saya sudah mendengar banyak dari pemateri, yaitu Profesor Azza Karam. Saya betul-betul merasa sangat kagum dan bahagia. Saya juga sangat tertarik karena materi ini benar-benar menekankan bagaimana generasi muda berperan penting dalam merawat bumi, menjaga alam, dan dalam perbaikan dunia. Juga bagaimana agama harus mengesampingkan perbedaan-perbedaan yang ada agar kita bisa berjalan bersama, bergandengan tangan untuk memperbaiki dunia, terutama dari masalah climate change yang memang dampaknya sangat terasa bagi kita. Mungkin pesan dari saya untuk generasi muda, kita harus berani menyuarakan pendapat dan juga berani bergerak. Demikian.
Terima kasih Mbak Ilma. So yeah, Mbak Ilma, as a representative of younger generation, has shared with us that this whole lecture has sort of like enlightened her how to put aside differences among religious groups and instead focuses on join hands to take real actions to save the environment. And for her personally, as a young person, she said that she has been invited how to be braver, to speak up, and to just to say her own thoughts without malu or getting shy and think twice, because she now knows that she has the power that is needed. Thank you, Mbak Ilma. I think we are coming to the end of our public lecture. I would like to give the floor back to the panel. Mungkin panitia mau ambil alih untuk melanjutkan ke sesi berikutnya.
I think I take over.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret, for moderating this program. Thank you also for the insightful presentation from Professor Azza Karam and the enthusiastic from the attendees for the questions. So now let's move on another session. That was the closing remarks. We know we'll have a closing remark from the director of Interfaith, who's representing the collaborative organization in the Interfaith School program. And also she was chair of Asia Pacific Women of Faith Network, and also ACRP member of Religion for Peace in Indonesia. Please welcome Dr. Elga Sarapung.
Well, I would like to make a correction first. I myself not a doctor, so this is my academic responsibility to let you know about that. Okay, let me give my closing remarks to our forum this morning. Professor Azza Karam and all the invited guests who attended friends from Asia Conference of Religions and Peace, and from Religions for Peace Indonesia, and the entire network from the government, civil society, religious institutions and belief, personal or group and community, teachers and students from several schools in Yogyakarta, youth, students, and activists from many parts of Indonesia, from Papua to Aceh. Interfaith school participants, facilitator teams from all cooperation institutions, all those present at this forum, the public lecture as the end of the Interfaith school, which has been going on for one semester from February to May this month. First of all, we thank God for allowing this 13th Interfaith school to run in the midst of the ongoing pandemic. Today, the 13th Interfaith school with the theme Religions and Climate Change and the sub-theme Interfaith Youth Movement in Facing Climate Change Challenges is coming to the end. Next week, Saturday, we will still have one more meeting for evaluation and reflection in various creative ways, short videos, music and songs, poetry. There will be also academic writing as a requirement of each campus. Next Saturday, we will talk about what actions will be taken both in together. In addition, we will also determine together the theme for next year. Today, we are very grateful for being enriched by a resource person who not only has extraordinary competence about knowledge and experience, but also as our own sister in the common spirit, that is the spirit of sister and brotherhood in one common hope, namely peace. May we be able to strengthen each other's networks and sister and brotherhoods, even if our backgrounds are different, gender, religion and beliefs, and ethnicity, race, and even generation. May we remain committed to be peace actors as well together, among others, through the interfaith schools, our respective institutions, through Religions for Peace International, Asia Conference of Religions for Peace, and Religions for Peace Indonesia. May this momentum be a good and useful to increase the spirit to all of us so that we can be together in a joint movement for peace through prevention efforts to face and overcome the problem of climate change with all its complications which are happening around our lives. For that, we are very grateful to Professor Azza Karam for taking the time, opening the doors of the present and future together for all of us by enriching us with knowledge and experience and encouraging, optimistic and hopeful to all of us. May all our thoughts, sincere of life, go in the same direction and purpose, namely peace in healthy earth, a world that is friendly to humanity and nature that supports each other. May all the creatures of the world live happily and peacefully. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much for the closing remark, Bu Elga Sarapung. Okay, before we finally close this event, we are going to have a photo session. So then please take your seat properly and make sure that you're turning on your camera till the committee has captured the screen. Please, Kak Fari.
Okay, thank you, Shafira. Okay, let's turn the camera on. Kak Anissa, are you ready? Okay, I will counting down. 1, 2, 3. Oke. Kak Anissa ada berapa slide, Kak?
Ada 4, Kak.
Oke. Slide 2. 1, 2, 3. Okay, move to slide 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, last one, slide 4. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kak Fari, and also Kak Anissa for capturing our photo here. And so now we are getting into the final session that was closing prayer with the Buddhist tradition that will be delivered from the Ganda Silani as the student of the Kartarajasa Buddhist Academy. And she is also Atta Silani or Buddhist nun. The time is yours.
Terima kasih untuk
Kakak masih ingat di rumah Sentani?
Oh, apakah suara saya bisa terdengar dengan jelas?
Yes, clear.
Bisa.
Terima kasih. Terima kasih kepada Mbak Anissa untuk waktu dan kesempatan yang diberikan kepada saya. Dan saya mohon izin untuk pagi hari ini saya akan memimpin doa sesuai dengan keyakinan kita masing-masing dan mohon izinkan saya untuk memimpin secara Buddhis. Sebelumnya, puji syukur kita haturkan kepada Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, karena dengan berkah Tuhan, pada hari ini kita dapat melaksanakan acara Interfaith School XIII General Lecture dalam kondisi yang sehat. Dan sebagai wujud syukur kita, marilah kita merangkapkan kedua tangan kita untuk kita bersama-sama memanjatkan doa. Dan semoga dengan apa yang telah kita lakukan pada hari ini membawa kesejahteraan bagi kita semua. Semoga dengan kekuatan keyakinan kita pada Tuhan Yang Maha Esa, semoga dengan kekuatan kebajikan yang telah kita lakukan, semoga acara pada hari ini membawa kesejahteraan, kebahagiaan, dan manfaat bagi kita semua. Semoga segala bencana, wabah, dan segala hal yang buruk dapat segera sirna. Semoga kesatuan, persatuan, dan kedamaian selalu berada dalam hidup kita. Semoga dengan segala kebajikan yang telah kita lakukan, kita semua hidup berbahagia, bebas dari kebencian, bebas dari penderitaan, bebas dari menyakiti dan disakiti, serta bebas dari penderitaan jasmani dan batin. Sabbityo vivajantu sabbarogo vinasatu mate bhavan tuantarayo sukhi dikha yuko bhava abhivadanasi lesani cang Buddha Pacayino Cattaro Dhamma Vadhanti Ayuwano Sukham Bala Bhavatu Sabba Manggalang Rakhantu Sabba Dewata Sabba Buddhanubhavena Sada Sodhi Bhavantu Te Bhavatu Sabba Manggalang Rakhantu Sabba Dewata Sabba Dhammanubhavena Sada Sodhi Bhavantu Te Bhavatu sabba manggalang rakhantu sabba dewata sabba sanghanub bhavena satta soti bhavantu te. Sadu, sadu, sadu. Terima kasih, Mbak Anissa.
Okay, thank you very much for the pray, atas Silani Ganda Silani. So, Professor Azza, would you like to remain for a sec because Bu Elga Sarapung will be interact for you for a while? Okay, the time is yours, Bu Elga.
Yes. So I think I would like to introduce some of the participants used to be introduced, but I have to choose for some. Let me start with I saw one of our board member here of Regions for Peace Indonesia, Professor Nyoman Kertia. He's a medical doctor, but especially for verbal. This in the corner, he himself a Balinese, but he's now in Yogyakarta. So it's one of our Regions for Peace member, and he is also one of our governing board member in ACRP. Yeah. So, and the second, I think, may I introduce Ibu Nasrin. Ibu Nasrin from Baha'i, the leader of Baha'i community here in Indonesia, and also Ibu Anis Farihatin, one of the teachers who are here. She's very long working with us in Interfaith Day as a teacher. She's also now as a facilitator. Kemal Fasha from Lok Sumawe, Aceh. He's an anthropologist. He's teaching as a lecturer at the university there. And who else? I saw this morning also, but Ibu Kanti from Gita Santi Nusantara, who are working for our coming action plan of Regions for Peace Indonesia. We are collaborate the group, the community, Gita Santi Nusantara. The chair is Professor Nyoman Kertia, and she is the team member of our teamwork. So, and some more. Oh, Sue Ennis, of course, you know. Yeah, some for Japan, they leave, or is that Yasmin? Are you here? Oh yes, there's is Yasmin Kawada. She is our secretary, Woman Network, Asian Woman Network. She's from Osaka. Are you in Osaka now, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
Selamat
So,
siang.
yeah, and I saw Father Mateus Wali, and where is Father Yohanes? Oh, is Roma Pras. Muncul sedikit lah. He's one of our facilitator from the Sanata Dharma University, and Reverend Boydo Hutagalung, also from Yogyakarta. And sorry, I don't see any. Oh, Ibu Irsum from IAIN Kudus, yeah. Ibu Irsum, are you here? So, Professor Azza Karam. Oh, I saw Listia and Norma. Norma from Banda Aceh and Listia from Jogja. And the other youth member from Makassar, Yohana from Jalin Harmony. And I saw here many youth and activists also for human trafficking. Ibu Maria Hinggi here. And because we have also our Zero Human Trafficking Network. So not only for climate change, but also for human human trafficking, and for Papua. We are working on those issues. Professor Azza Karam, we are trying to work together to be a big network, campus, activists, but also government and many other groups. And we do hope that our interfaith school can do something for our next planning for action plan. And we will discuss it about tomorrow, next week, Saturday. That is our last meeting in through Zoom like this. We do hope that this is the last year for us to do this program through this technology. But luckily for this kind of technology we use, that we can also open to other friends from other regions, not only from Yogyakarta. Yeah, so yeah, so that's all. If you want to say something, maybe a message for all of us for the last moment now, before midnight there. No, what time is it now?
It's 11:50.
11. Okay. So maybe
not midnight yet. We still have 45 minutes for midnight. Okay. Yeah, we still have a lot. It's early, very early in the evening. No, I honestly, I think I'm very grateful for all the work that you do. I think that what I loved hearing from all of you was the connection between the different areas of work: climate, rights, human trafficking. All of these are indeed interconnected, and I think the lesson I learn, and people in Religions for Peace, I think around the world, learn from a lot of the work that's going on in Asia, is that there is no way that we can work in these different silos. It doesn't make sense. In fact, the most successful work is what you do, which is where you bring in the different thematic approaches to one. And I think Sue spoke about this, you spoke about this, a number of others also spoke about this. So there's much to learn. The challenge for all of us is exactly the same, that we are living in a time when hate and division, polarization, supremacy, exclusion are so normal. They're so normal. And they're outspoken, and they are hard now to hide. So people speak in such negative terms about being politically correct, as if being politically correct is a terrible thing. And it may be that being too politically correct is not a good idea, but being uncivil and disrespectful and hateful is not a good idea. And I think the work that you all do is so important to show the example, because we can talk for a long time, but it's the actual work that you do together. And exactly as you said, Zoom has actually been incredible. I mean, it's an opportunity to regularly see people in other parts of the world at very little cost. It's important. You don't have to travel and accommodation and the money and now we are in each other's living rooms, in each other's spaces, with one screen. Yes, it's not the same as being able to be together. Absolutely not the same. But it's much better than being together in one region only, one country only, one specific subcontinent only. And this is an opportunity to be together across the world. Hatred does not need us to be together like this in person, but it does demand to confront hatred, to confront polarization, to confront division, demands that we can be each other with our spirit. And if Zoom can help us be spiritually aligned, then it's a very fine instrument indeed. And we should definitely thank God for it and harvest it. In the meantime, we have no choice but to be allies with one another, to be each other's keeper, to be each other's brother and sister. We have no choice. It's the only way to survive. And that does mean that we have to respect every blade of grass we walk on, every branch of a tree, broken or still alive, every leaf. We must give thanks for those things and appreciate them and live for them even more than we've ever done. So I want to thank you for your work. You continue, all of you. You're a doctor in my eyes, Elga. Khalas, you are always Elga. So as far as I'm concerned, who Elga, Dr. Elga, it's all the same. Honestly, I think we have a great deal to learn from you and from all of
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we are very, very grateful. We are very lucky that you could share with us today. And Sue, thank you so much. And Kawada, Yasmin, thank you. And the others, I think they left already. And ya, terima kasih semuanya sudah hadir ya. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih.
Thank you for much.
So, good night for you, Azza.
Terima kasih ya. Thank you. Grazie.
Terima kasih.
Thank you, Prof. Azza.
Terima kasih Bu Elga.
Halo, terima
Bu Elga.
kasih Mbak Lisa, sama-sama.
Sampai jumpa minggu depan.
Ya,
Penyoman, sehat selalu Penyoman.
Sama.
Sampai jumpa.
Bye.
Bye.